But I doubt it. To a more positive note, today here in Atlanta at Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King Jr. used to preach, the funeral, the memorial service funeral for Congressman John Lewis took place. And I want to share with you his final words in a moment. But the acting editorial page editor of the New York Times published John Lewis's final statement as per request from Congressman Lewis. He had written this and sent it to the Times with the request that they hold off until his funeral to publish it in the Times. But the editorial page editor, Kathleen Kingsbury, said the brief essay that John Lewis sent her 2 days before his death expressed the hope for national healing and reconciliation that guided John Lewis's life's work. Kathleen writes, for too many Americans, the civil rights movement is visible only in the rearview mirror of memory. Black and white photographs of demonstrators being attacked by police dogs and fire hoses, of lunch counters and schoolhouses, separate and unequal, but all of it in the past. John Lewis lived that history, of course, Kathleen writes, but his most urgent plea was that the work of the civil rights movement remains unfinished, and that conscience commands that we look to the future. Important civil rights legislation has stalled in Congress at this very moment, held up by the patently false assertion that racial discrimination no longer exists. Well, glory, hallelujah. I didn't know that. Did you know that, gentle listener? Eh? Now, I'm talking to my white brothers and sisters and cousins, and okay? Because black folk know damn good and well that that's a bullshit line if one ever existed. But to my white brothers and sisters, do you believe that racial discrimination no longer exists? Come on, fess up. Honest now. Back to Kathleen Kingsbury's statement. She says, Mr. Lewis served a member of Congress for 33 years before his death from pancreatic cancer on July 17th. Before even being sworn in as a lawmaker, he had already borne so much for America. The editorial board of the New York Times wrote in remembrance this: Mr. Lewis's moral authority found its headwaters in the aggressive yet self-sacrificial style of protest that he and his compatriots in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, deployed in the early 1960s as part of the campaign that overthrew Southern apartheid. Here, of course, in the United States. Kathleen goes on, the fight for civil rights was brutal. His classmate, Dr. Bernard Lafayette Jr., in a recent op-ed at the Times, said this, quote, I remember John had no reservations about going down and sitting in and knowing that we could be injured. You could be clobbered. I was there on the bus platform in Montgomery, Alabama, when they hit him over the head with a Coca-Cola crate and smashed his head. End quote. Kathleen writes, Mr. John Lewis's commitment to nonviolent protest never wavered, not through dozens of attacks and arrests, not through the reversal of hard-won gains, not even in the final weeks of his life, as the country erupted in unrest over the police killing of George Floyd. His final words ask us to cast our eyes forward. Americans who want to honor Mr. Lewis and continue his fight for civil rights can do so by urging their lawmakers to restore the protections enshrined in the Voting Rights Act for which Mr. Lewis fought so ardently. Ensuring that all Americans can exercise the right to vote was Mr. Lewis's unfinished work. It's up to the nation to finish it. End quote. Now, that was a statement from Kathleen Kingsbury, who is the acting editorial page editor of the New York Times. And what she's referring to there, the restoration of some of the protections in the Voting Rights Act, which the Supreme Court ruled were unnecessary now because, no such thing occurs as cross-check. No such thing occurs as bully boys from this filthy, hideous orange ape are willing to stand outside polling places to intimidate people, a lot of them with their guns. But no need for restoration of the Voting Rights Act. Those sections removed as no longer necessary. 2 words. Bullshit. Or is that one word? John Lewis wrote this essay shortly before his death to be published upon the day of his funeral. I'm going to quote John Lewis. Well, my time here has now come to an end. I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people, motivated simply by human compassion, laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That's why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C., though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never, ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by 2 loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shooting unwitting concertgoers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said, we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it was not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we called the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes, though decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence, is the more excellent way. Now, it's your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. You have your choice. You can listen to The Ranting with the audio podcast or listen and watch me lose control with a video podcast subscription. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.